Well, hi, folks, and welcome to part two of the Washington sabbatical log. In part two, for the first 2 days, we found after the trip was planned that we were going to be coinciding with the visit of Pope Francis I. And while I'm a big fan of Pope Francis I, it seemed like that was going to put a major crimp in our style in terms of seeing the art and architecture of Washington, D.C. In fact, by the time we leave for day 6, we're going to take trips to Virginia to see Monticello and then into Baltimore. There's going to be plenty of fenced off and tarped over monuments at that point. So we rented a car and took off for Virginia, and immediately I found out I was not in Kansas anymore. The first thing was a bear in very close to folks' houses ran out in front of the car. That was pretty exciting. And then I pulled over to an Exxon to fill things up in the middle of nowhere. And I thought, okay, well, it's the middle of nowhere. You didn't plan well for gas. You're going to get fleeced. And no, it was 1.99 a gallon, the least I've paid for gas since I think I was maybe in college. Monticello is the home of Thomas Jefferson. He is the architect, and of course, I've been chasing this American neoclassical style, which is often just referred to as the Jeffersonian or Federal style. And the sort of iconic building in that is Monticello. His home means little mountain. He actually used slave labor to have the top of a mountain flattened and built his plantation home at the top. It's very famous for having this sort of amazing octagonal drum and then dome on top. He had the chance when he was the Minister of France, relieving Benjamin Franklin, to see French neoclassical and, of course, Italian classical architecture. And so you see buildings from the Palladio all the way back to the Pantheon at play here. We took the big tour, the behind the scenes tour, and I want to highly recommend that if you take the chance to go here. I know it's like 30 or 40 bucks more, but instead of being a half an hour tour of the bottom floor, it's a full hour and a half to 2 hour tour, and it takes you into that dome room, the Oculus room at the top, where you can actually see. This is the one place where we were allowed to take photographs within the confines of Monticello, but you can see what he was trying to do here. That coffering, that Oculus, they really do speak of the tradition that comes down from the Pantheon. And in standing behind the structure here, you can see where the dome is set within the building. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I wish I'd been able to take more photographs. Jefferson brought a lot of innovations from Europe back to the United States. One of the most fun ones was the dumbwaiter, and he had a dumbwaiter system where he could bring bottles of wine up from the cellar into his drawing room on either side of his fireplace, kind of in a hidden compartment, so the wine could just keep showing up and the conversations could just keep going. Really amazing place. The other spot that we were hitting in Virginia was the University of Virginia, which is Jefferson's last real architectural accomplishment within his lifetime. What had happened is that William and Mary College, his alma mater, had stopped supporting science in a way that he really thought was appropriate. And so he and a number of other individuals got together, and including Madison, and they were able to uh, get the will of Virginia to build the University of Virginia, and he is the main architect on this older part of the structure. Together, these two sites are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Unfortunately, the big building that everybody wants to come see, you can see it right here, is under scaffolding and is being restored at the time. That's just one of those things that happens when you start a trip up. You find out what is under reconstruction. The next day, coming back extremely late, we got up and took an early Amtrak into Baltimore. And in Baltimore, there were a couple of spots I wanted to see, specifically the Baltimore Art Museum and then the Walters Museum. Two very fine collections. I sort of had the wrong idea about what was in the Baltimore Art Museum. It had a good collection of masters' works from Europe. It had a really interesting assortment of Roman floor mosaics. But then in a part of the museum that was marked as contemporary, it actually started in modernity. So, with things like Matisse and a whole bunch of really beautiful pieces. And so I want to highly recommend the portion it calls contemporary that's really sort of modern, that includes this amazing blue period Picasso piece. We took a little tour of the town with a friend who drove us between the two museums and met us for lunch. One of the main highlights in terms of just sort of raw splendor and beauty is the Peabody Library on the left here. We simply walked in to see what this thing looked like, and as you can see, it's absolutely incredible. And they were having a talk on bookbinding, so we even got to see a few manuscripts that were taken apart as we walked around. And then to the right there, we're now at Mount Vernon Place, which is where the Peabody and the Walters Museum are. You can see that Baltimore has its own Washington Monument. A little smaller, but a little more Roman traditional as opposed to being a huge obelisk. The Walters, unfortunately, also had things that were closed. In this particular case, it was the collection that I was hoping to go see. The Asian wing was closed for restoration, but it was still a really interesting collection by a local collector with exquisite taste, really, really fine stuff, especially from the Romantic period forward. But one thing that was kind of a highlight for Sarah and I going through the old masterworks was the allegory of grammar here on the right. We just thought that was really fun to see an embodiment of grammar, and you can actually see a little grammar on what looks like the ticker tape on her left hand to your right side. That night it was fusion food time again at a place called Doobies. Now that's possessive, not plural of the word doobie, and it's spelled Dooby. So it's a guy's name. In the upper left, we've got some really interesting appetizers, including avocado toast and some pork dumplings. It's Korean street noodles to the upper right, and I just really loved that the pie at the bottom, which kind of has a creme brulee top and some really sort of aromatic flavors in it, was simply named Damn Good Pie. I was going to get Damn Good Pie. From there, we had our last day of sort of museum crawling. That's day 8, in which we visited a couple of places that really look at American history and how they intersect with both fine art and sort of art and popular culture. One thing I wanted to see in the American History Museum was one of the capitals from one of the earliest Mormon temples in Nauvoo that was eventually sort of sacked and hit by a tornado. So there aren't very many artistic pieces left from it. This is one that's generally called a sun capital. And to the right, you can see the original Kermit the Frog. It was very odd to see him under glass. But I will say he sounded like the real Kermit, the old Kermit, not our new Kermit. From there, we went to the American Art Museum, and which also doubles up with the National Portrait Gallery. This is actually the old stomping ground of Professor Flora Carter, and we found it to be really enjoyable. It was a great place to look at American history as it relates to art, and especially at the end of each of or at the section that deals with presidential portraits, we found a really interesting contrast. Now, of course, they're really representational and they're very traditional on the way down from the founding fathers. So there are a few painters who are really mostly famous for painting those founding fathers, and then there was one by George Caleb Bingham. But it wasn't until you get to relative modernity that people start sort of having options with things. And so on the left is a Norman Rockwell portrait of Richard Nixon. And I thought that was a very interesting choice to put forward as the embodiment of Nixon and what his vision was of America. And to the right is a Chuck Close piece of President Bill Clinton. Even though from Nixon on, and even before Kennedy's time at least, there was a very vibrant modernist pictorial figural pictorial tradition in the U.S. It's not till President Clinton that you get somebody who wants a modernist portrait. And then it goes back to pretty representational with President George Bush II, George W. Bush. And so we'll see what President Obama chooses. I thought this was a really interesting contrast, though, of these two presidents' visions for how they would like their legacy remembered. So, of course, we're eating all along the way. And on this particular day, we went to a place that was called Founding Farmers, and they do organic, sustainable, high quality ingredients and a lot of traditional American recipes. So on the left is artisan breads, prosciutto with fig on top, really amazing. On the right was chicken and waffles with a macaroni and cheese side, and also organic couscous. Really fantastic meal. Probably should have gone twice. We capped that day off with a viewing of. We were in the audience of the world premiere of a Jessica Dickey play, The Guard, which deals with the nature of sort of what it means to be human and how fragile that is, and how fragile statements in art are. And it's just very, very complicated, very beautiful play. I recommend it when it comes around. We went and saw that world premiere in Ford's Theater, and so you can see myself, Sarah, and her folks sitting in Ford's Theater to the on your right here, right next to well, the booth where Lincoln was assassinated. Really interesting intersection of the modern with American history. It was a really fulfilling day. On our last day, we'd actually accomplished most of the things that we had wanted to do, and we'd accomplished them on time. So we got to relax a little and check out some things that we weren't sure that we were actually going to get to fit in. The first in the morning was the Washington National Gallery. It's a Gothic revival building, very late Gothic revival building, and you may have heard of it in the news after the earthquake in 2011. One of the gargoyles broke, and they had a competition, and the person who won that competition did a Darth Vader gargoyle, which thematically fit because it was on, I believe, this spire right here on a side that's always the dark side. So it was kind of perfect. Really amazing, big, beautiful space. But what I was interested in checking out that we could get a good look at on the left here was they have a piece of moon rock that's in the middle of a stained glass design, and I thought that was a very beautiful and effective design. It was a pretty moving piece. For lunch that day, Sarah and I followed a recommendation of a colleague, Dr. Curtis Martin. He and his wife Deborah had, Professor Deborah Martin, had recommended a place that was really amazing Ethiopian food, and that sounded like the perfect way to have our last meal in DC. For folks who haven't been to the East Coast before, there's a much larger immigrant African community, and so you can do you can just get things that you can't get as easily here on the West Coast. And yeah, these are little bits of pancake that you tear up and then eat the various pieces with your hands. It's really an amazing experience, and there are places in the East Bay if you want to go find it. I highly recommend. Our last visit was to the Krieger Museum, and this was another just absolutely exquisite private collection. And this private collection had beautiful pieces that were impressionist to early modernist. So there was a David Smith that was still painted, and I kid you not, there were maybe 8 Picassos in the front room. A great room of Monets and Renoirs, some Odilon Redons, just a fantastic museum collection. And those things are in this absolutely gorgeous townhouse, which is in a very, very posh area of DC. And then it's mixed with two other types of collections. The first is that there is Asian art throughout. There's actually a little African art as well. And then the sort of foundation in and around it has taken the modernist sculpture garden they had in the backyard and spread it. This would be around the other side of the building. This is the back side where the sculpture garden begins. It comes around this way into very modern sculpture. And so they're continuing to collect and build the grounds as a museum. It was a really fantastic spot. I wasn't sure what to expect, and I was pretty blown away. Well, that does it for the Washington, D.C. edition of the Sabbatical Log. I will be taking a little rest from traveling for a few weeks here, but in just a couple of weeks, in late October here, Sarah and I are going to be taking off for yet another location, a more exotic location this time. We're going to be heading down the east coast of Australia and then up into the Northern Territories. So check back in a little under a month for the Australian edition of the Sabbatical Log.